Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to see the difference between the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. Okay. Introduction. So before knowing the difference, now let us recall what's the exact thing about fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. Okay. So this fundamental rights is enshrined in our part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and Article 12 to 35 deals with the fundamental rights. Okay. Whereas directive principles of state policy is in the part 4 of the Indian Constitution, that too in the Article 35 to 51. Okay. Then this fundamental rights is guaranteed to every citizens of India. Okay. Whereas this directive principles of state policy or the guidelines followed by the government while framing the policies. So these both is considered as a philosophy of the constitution and the soul of the constitution, which is the conscience of Indian Constitution. Now let us look into the difference between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. First one, this fundamental rights are in negative aspect, that is, it imposes limitations on the functioning and the working of the state, whereas this directive principles of state policy is positive in their aspect, and they ask the state to do certain things for the welfare state. So it is positive in its direction, whereas the fundamental rights are negative in its directions. Next one. These fundamental rights are justiciable in the court. That is, if they are violated, we can approach either High Court or Supreme Court for their implementation, proper implementation. Okay. And this violation of fundamental rights is punishable and it is considered as an offense. Whereas violation of directive principles of state policy is not punishable, and unlike that of fundamental rights. Okay. These fundamental rights ensure the political democracy in the state. That is, political democracy is established with the help of these fundamental rights. Whereas economic and social democracy is established by this directive principles of state policy. That is, it is trying to make a particular state as a welfare state. Okay. Then they have legal sanctions, that only I said. Okay, that is, it is punishable, whereas this directive principles doesn't have any legal sanctions, only it has a moral sanctions. So if they are violated, they are questioned by the electoral community. That is, it is a vote bank. People will question the government. Okay. So fundamental rights promote the welfare of the individual, whereas the directive principles promote the welfare of the whole state. Okay, community as a whole. Okay. Then it doesn't require any legislation for their implementation, because the fundamental rights in itself has one single article which says that if it is violated, you can approach Supreme Court. That is constitutional remedies. Okay, and they are automatically enforced. But whereas directive principles of state policy requires separate legislation if it want it to be enforceable or punishable. Okay, so thus this articles or the differences between the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. One more thing is, this fundamental right is borrowed from the American Constitution, whereas this directive principles of state policy is borrowed from the Ireland Constitution. Okay. So, nevertheless, of this both differences, we require both the things, both the features in our Indian Constitution for the full realization of the potential of the individual. Thank you, everyone, for listening.